Hello and welcome back to the Med Device Cyber Podcast. I'm your co-host, Trevor Slattery, our CTO, with our co-host, Christian Espinoza, the founder and CEO of Blue Goat. Today, we're joined by a very special guest, Greg Garcia from the Health Sector Coordinating Council. I'd like to check in and just ask how everyone's doing today.
Doing great. Glad to be here.
Fantastic. We're going to be going over some pretty exciting stuff. We're talking about rounding up some of the legacy devices that we've seen out in the wild that are facing some pretty nasty cybersecurity considerations, talking about what the industry as a whole is doing to try to drive cybersecurity forward and how we're making sure that medical devices are safe, along with the steps that innovators should be taking.
Awesome. Well, Greg, you want to maybe introduce yourself a little bit about what you do at your organization and some of the initiatives your organization has going on? Maybe your background with MedTech. We always like to understand people's lenses they're looking through with MedTech, cybersecurity, and MedTech in general.
Well, my experience with MedTech is that, like both of you and virtually everybody, I'm a patient. But at a technical level, I'm not an expert in medical technology. In fact, as the executive director of the Cybersecurity Working Group of the Health Sector Coordinating Council, what I bring to this is a deep, long background in technology generally, cybersecurity specifically, and the intersection of public policy, business, and technology, or business and operations and technology. And I was in a similar role with the Financial Services Sector Coordinating Council many years ago. I was with a major American bank. And before that, I was with the Department of Homeland Security. So I was the nation's first assistant secretary for cybersecurity and communications, appointed by President Bush in 2006. And in that role, coordinating our national critical infrastructure cybersecurity policy, I was exposed to really all of the nation's critical infrastructure sectors. Healthcare is just one of them. Telecommunications is another. Financial services, oil and gas, electricity, transportation, chemicals, water. Everything that the public depends upon is considered critical infrastructure. And so my role at the Department of Homeland Security was try to coordinate the public-private partnerships that were necessary for us to work together to identify and mitigate systemic threats, systemic cyber threats to those critical sectors. So really, I bring to the health sector since 2017 a background in information technology, in financial services, in the executive branch, public policy, and in the Congress. I spent some time in the Congress. In fact, the first bill I ever wrote, and the last bill I ever wrote, was the Cybersecurity Research and Development Act of 2002. So I got to sit on the House floor, the House of Representatives, and watch the bill that I had worked on so heavily get passed into law. So that was cool. So now with the health sector, I am less an expert on healthcare and medical devices. I've certainly learned a lot over the past 7 years that I've been here. But this role is more about making those connections between healthcare as a business and as a delivery mechanism with the technology that's used for that, the public policy and the operations. All of these interdependent, interconnected issues are part of this larger constellation. And then I rely on the thought leadership of our membership. The Cyber Working Group now consists of about 470 healthcare organizations from across the spectrum. The healthcare providers, like the hospitals and the clinics, the medical device companies, the health IT companies like Cerner and Epic and others, the plans and the payers, the pharmaceutical, the labs, the blood organizations, all of them are part of this interconnected ecosystem. So they are the owners and operators. They are the ones who are responsible for securing this critical infrastructure and in understanding those interdependencies, those interconnections between all of those subsectors, and how together they recognize that cyber threats. Those cyber threats are a shared challenge across all of those subsectors and therefore a shared responsibility. So that's what brings us all together.
And what do you think with medtech? I know there's you were recently involved with, I think, testifying against about some of the legacy devices that are already out there. And I know the FDA changed their guidance in September of 2023 to really up the ante from a cybersecurity perspective. What is your thoughts generally on like the legacy problem and what we can do about it? And then also, do you think we're heading in the right direction?
Okay, so yes, the whole medical technology issue in healthcare is a fascinating one, and it's more severe, but not dissimilar from what I experienced in the financial services sector. That is two different subsectors, two different sectors, the banking industry and the telecommunications industry. In those days, the banks were sort of yelling at the telcos, the ISPs, quit sending all this malware, all these viruses through your networks into our systems. And the telcos would say, look, we can't just throttle all traffic. We'd be violating terms of service and other things, and trying to identify all malicious traffic is nearly impossible. But by the way, banks, why don't you fix your crappy architecture? Because, you have tools at your disposal to detect and protect against that kind of malware. So there is a circular finger pointing that was going on. And when I came into the health sector, the same kind of circular finger pointing and mutual recriminations was taking place between the healthcare systems, or the HDOs, and the MDMs, the medical device manufacturers. Who's responsible? Who's accountable for medical devices, for the security of medical devices? And, I was sort of, in the crossfire where there would be a lot of, myths and preconceptions being tossed against the other side about fault, about accountability, and a lot of it was true and legitimate, and a lot of it was just myths. And so the value of the Sector Coordinating Council, the Cybersecurity Working Group, as a cross-sector body, is that you first have to start with the recognition, with the acknowledgement that this is a shared responsibility, that cybersecurity does not rest solely in the hands of one set of stakeholders like the medical device companies or the hospital systems, that it's a shared challenge. And if you acknowledge that, then you say, okay, then what do we have to do together? How do we need to listen to each other a little bit more closely and find out and suss out really who's accountable for this and who's accountable for that, and start a negotiation process. And I think the Medical Device and Health IT Joint Security Plan, which was first published by us in January of 2019, was co-chaired by Becton Dickinson, medical device company, by the Mayo Clinic, and by FDA. So you have three really big, important actors as the leaders of a task group which is trying to develop a secure by design, secure by default, total life cycle product security management system. And it becomes a negotiation. What are the expectations? And, when you have those representatives from those three major stakeholder groups, if you're a chair, you want to succeed. And to succeed, what do you have to do? You have to get task group members to start listening to each other. And with listening comes mutual understanding. With mutual understanding comes the ability to compromise. And when you compromise, then you get consensus. So that's the model. And so the Joint Security Plan and the follow-up JSP2, and many other medical device products, publications that we have put out over the past several years, all have followed that model of bringing together the stakeholders who don't always agree, and they're able to talk it out. And in in many good cases, I've heard both sides say, I see. Okay, I didn't know that. Okay, okay, so I understand what we need to do now. And that is what that kind of mutual understanding and compromise led us to additional publications like the Managing Legacy Technology Security, or MALT, HICMALTS, the Health Industry Cybersecurity Managing Legacy Technology Security. That's about a 120-page document, and it's written out in a modular format. You're a healthcare provider, and you need to be able to secure legacy medical devices that are no longer being supported or are soon not to be supported by the operating system company or by the medical device company. What do? Well, you can't afford $10 million in a new fleet of medical devices. How are you going to maintain the security of those devices when naturally 10, 15 years later, they're not being supported anymore? You're a medical device company. How are you going to provide assurances? How will you transfer risk in an orderly way, in a predictable way to your hospital systems so that they can plan for that point at which there's no longer support? So, that was the result of really the major medtech and health provider organizations really working together to say, what can each of us be held accountable to? And what can we make commitments for? And the same with a model contract. We developed a model contract. What are 85% of the most common cybersecurity terms and conditions in a contract between an MDM and an HDO? When you start talking about legal language, oh my goodness, it gets really sticky. But we worked through that, and that model contract has been used all across much of the sector, because they want something that's sort of uniform and coherent. You don't have to rewrite it every time. If the big guys can say, yeah, we can be accountable to this, then, the mid-size and the smaller organizations can say, well, if it's good enough for, the big guys, we can figure out how to make this work. That's our method of working. How do I think the last part of your question was, where do you think we're headed, or how are we doing? The level of awareness, I think, is really increasing the imperative that cyber safety is patient safety, that you cannot have patient safety without having cybersecurity built into medical devices, cybersecurity built into enterprise networks and data. The awareness is rising, but of course the hardest issue, of course, is resources. So, when you look at implementing the JSP, for example, well, a lot of the big med tech companies are already doing something like that. But it's all the others down the chain that are less resourced and maybe aren't thinking about cybersecurity in as high a level of priority as the others are. They're just trying to meet their minimum requirements by FDA and get on with it and get their product to market quickly and cheaply. And so that can be one of the main stumbling block, is to instill this sense of urgency across the industry that there is no stakeholder in the industry that should be absolved of responsibility. The med tech security issue. Thankfully, there are very few reports of medical devices being the primary attack vector of a cyber attack that resulted in patient harm. Most often, the cyber attacks are successfully being perpetrated, getting into the network through email phishing or unpatched apps, internet-facing apps. But medical devices are less so. But security people are paid to be paranoid. So let's not let all of these vulnerabilities let's not just sweep them under the carpet. We've got to figure out how to do this better.
In our experience interacting with medical devices is they aren't usually going to be an entry point, but they can be a weak link in the chain. And so even if you have your patch management across any workstations covered, you're trying to maintain the latest version of anything as far as the rest of your hospital infrastructure, introducing an insecure medical device can act as kind of the foothold that an attacker needs to start pivoting out into the network. And that's when we start talking about considerations for, ransomware attacks. That initial access, getting a low-level user credential can be one thing. Then what are you going to do with it? You need to find a way to start making further compromise from there. You need to jump and keep escalating your privilege until eventually you can compromise something really sensitive for the whole network. And obviously, there need to be a lot of steps. There can be a lot of steps in that kill chain from entering the network to trying to encrypt the entire network. And you definitely don't want your medical device to be one of those steps.
Yeah, and that's absolutely right. And that that can be the principal complaint of the HDOs. Is that they can acknowledge that it generally is not the medical devices that are the entry point, but they also need to be able to, any self-respecting CISO who doesn't want to get fired next week wants to be able to buy technology and medical devices that are secure by design, secure by default, and they don't want to have to spend a lot of money doing the kinds of testing, pen testing, and other risk assessments associated with every purchase. It gets very expensive. And so they would like to see a more structured and uniform set of security offerings that go along with the medical device sale. So, and then on the other side of the medical device companies that, they're constantly, their competitive pressure is quicker to market, lower costs. In many cases, they will say, look, we're meeting FDA pre-market guidance. We're meeting the guidance. And if there's more that's needed, it has to be demanded, but we're not getting the demand because the demand ultimately is going to cost more. We just published today, a report on underserved, on the resource constrained healthcare providers, rural critical access, small clinics, FQHCs, all of those health providers across the country that, talk to them about third-party risk management or medical device security, and they just throw up their hands. Look, I have a hard enough time just hiring and keeping a nurse. How am I supposed to hire an IT security person or a medical device security person to manage this? They don't have the resources. So that is an existential problem, really, not just for the smalls, not just for the resource constrained, but all the way up. I mean, obviously, some of the largest healthcare providers, they have large budgets and staff to deal with this. But in most cases, margins are razor thin. So it's a difficult problem. And what we're trying to do in the cyber working group is try to build that culture of security, to raise the awareness up to the C-suite, to the board level of the imperative of good cybersecurity as not just one element of enterprise risk management, but as an essential part of patient care. And that's, culture change takes time.
Yeah, 100%. And you bring up a really good point on, if there are other budgetary problems, cybersecurity is going to be at the front of no one's mind. Cybersecurity, I feel like most organizations, if they could do away with it, they would. It's expensive, it's time consuming, and it isn't something that adds immediate visible value to your product, to your service. But I kind of refer to it, ironically, as being involved in cybersecurity as the necessary evil. You have to bring in penetration testing. You have to bring in all of these systems and processes in place to ensure that your network and your devices are hardened. But I think a big issue, it just ties all back into awareness. People aren't aware of why it's so important. They don't know how big of a deal cybersecurity is until they're the victim of a cybersecurity incident. And then as soon as there's a problem, then, they're really excited to try to figure out whatever the solution is. But at that point, it's too late. Dealing with the repercussions of a ransomware attack or dealing with the repercussions of patient records getting stolen and exfiltrated is always going to be exponentially more complicated and more expensive as opposed to preventative action. And so that's why it's so important to have this preventative action in place. But, you bring up the perfect point. If they're already razor thin margins, if HDO is having trouble just dealing with their core focus, their core mission, which is obviously delivering healthcare, then cybersecurity is going to be something difficult to work into. And so it's a difficult problem to solve in that regard.
But I'll tell you what, from this, do look at the publication that we put out today. This involved interviews from our side, our task group leads, two of them and myself, interviews with 40 executives from underserved providers across the country in 30 states. And we asked them a set of questions about cybersecurity and how do you equate cyber safety with patient safety? Do you know who's managing your cyber security program? How much are you putting into it? What about your insurance? Finally, with the expectation that the government is potentially going to regulate more, is going to demand more minimum cybersecurity requirements, regulatory requirements on health providers. We know that if you are being asked to do all of these new things on cyber, it's going to cost a lot and you can't afford it. What kind of help should the government be giving you? They can't just regulate and walk away. What kind of support from the government, from your peer networks within a region, from other private sector hospitals, what kind of support would be meaningful? And, the responses we got back was actually surprising that many of these people interviewed said, no, our board of trustees, they're very aware of cybersecurity and they're very worried about it. And they give us as much as they can relative to all the other priorities that the hospital has to deal with. But in none of the interviews did we sort of experience a sense of a lack of awareness or a lack of prioritization of cyber. But again, you still have to make those critical resource decisions. So, I think the case is being made. And in fact, I testified last year to another committee. It was the Senate Homeland Security Committee, and sitting next to me was one of our member organizations, and she was the CISO of a small critical access hospital in northern Vermont. And when the subject of regulation came up, she said, yeah, you have to regulate us. Because if you don't tell us to do it, we're not going to do it. And we're not going to do it because we have other resource priorities. So we understand that we are cyber poor. I mean, we're resource poor and we're cyber poor. But if we are actually going to move the needle and protect ourselves against ransomware attacks, existential ransomware attacks that can put us out of business, then we better be told, give us a minimum set of mandatory requirements and then help us comply. And then I turn it over to the medical device guys. And, when FDA was given that additional authorities by the Congress in 23, as Christian mentioned at the start. The so-called Patch Act, which now equates or includes cybersecurity in the consideration of medical device quality and safety. That good security is indicative of good quality and safety. So that was a paradigm shift, and I think a lot of the more forward-leaning medical device companies went along with it. They understood that is their responsibility. But at the same time, the healthcare systems, the hospital providers also need to do their part. They have to manage their data, their architectures, their networks, in a way that minimizes risk to not just the medical devices, but their data and other network endpoints.
Yeah, I think one of the challenges that I have noticed, because we've done penetration testing against hospitals or HDOs, we also work with medtech companies, and I think the healthcare delivery organizations, the HDOs, find it frustrating that they've got these devices on their environment that they really have no control over from a cybersecurity perspective. It shows up from the medical device manufacturer, and there's a lot of assumptions that this device is secure, but yet they really can't do anything to validate it. But they could segment it. I know a lot of them don't put it on a segmented network, and that is part of the problem. But it's kind of like you mentioned earlier. It's like pointing a finger. We're going to blame them, and they're going to blame us. But if we can collaborate a little bit better and work on this to better together, then I think the whole industry and healthcare would do better.
Oh, absolutely. And, I was, as I was looking at Blue Goat Cyber and before I came on to this podcast, I really like your vision, which is, I'm reading it here, a future where every connected medical device is secure, trusted, and resilient, protecting patients, enabling innovation, and earning regulatory confidence. I would say also earning patient confidence, but that is aligned very directly to, we have a 5-year cybersecurity strategic plan for the cybersecurity working group. And that really aligns with strategic objective number 1, which I will read to you. Develop and adopt and demand safety and resilience requirements for products and services offered from business to business, as well as health systems to patients, with the concept of secure by design and secure by default. And I will say that, the frustration that HDOs feel about medical devices, part of that will have to come down, I suppose. If more is needed, then it's going to come down to the Congress to give the FDA more regulatory authorities, and hopefully to leave it to FDA to figure out how specifically that would work. One of the things we could say is, make the JSP mandatory. Someone's going to say that because the JSP really does lay out a roadmap for how to do this well. But similarly, one of the things we've looked at, is one of our strategic priorities right now is what we're calling the systemic risk mapping exercise, or the SMART task group, sector mapping and risk template. And that comes right out of Change Healthcare. The Change Healthcare attack, like many other critical functions and services, there's many critical functions and services that support the healthcare environment. Whether it's, retail pharmacy, prescriptions and payments, or medical device imaging, blood supply and distribution, many other major workflows that depend on software, technology, communications platforms to execute the tasks that need to be executed. But there are many of these services and functions that are not regulated. They are IT systems. They're in the high-tech industry. They're not regulated, yet and that goes with, APIs that plug into patient data systems so that I can plug my Garmin watch into my medical provider and have all my vital information about heart rate and other vital signs available to my doctor. Yet some of these apps are simply not regulated and therefore vulnerable. Well, what do we do about those? I testified at another hearing last year where I sort of tested out. I freelanced a recommendation that said, look, how about any technology, software, service provider that supports any critical infrastructure? I mean, it's called critical infrastructure for a reason, because it generally involves life or death. Healthcare, electricity, water, transportation. You don't secure those, people can get hurt or die. Well, if you are supporting any critical infrastructure, is there a way to say you have to be held to a higher cybersecurity standard? Sort of like an FDA for all other technology that plugs into a medical system, a healthcare system, or an electric grid. Politically, that's explosive, right? And it's probably not practical either from a political standpoint or implementation. Who's going to be what federal agency is going to be responsible for regulating and enforcing that? But the concept is important, that as major users of these technology systems, health providers are at the mercy of those technology systems that are not always going to be secure in a way that gives, that earns regulatory confidence or earns patient confidence. And so this is the task we have before us, and particularly for the 5-year strategic plan. By the year 2029, will we have moved the needle enough to get us closer to the Blue Goat vision, to get us closer to our strategic plan vision?
It's interesting what you mentioned, because I used to be in the military and did a lot of work with DHS as well. And in order for someone to put a device on a DoD network, it has to be all totally scrutinized and all these approvals, and someone has to accept the risk. And I understand that that's a government agency, but it sounds like that something similar with critical infrastructure like healthcare, where a device has to be held to a higher cybersecurity standard, and there's an ATO, I guess, an authorization to operate that device on the environment. It sounds like you think that would help the industry, but there's some hurdles, because, like you mentioned, that means we're going to have to hire more people to regulate this. It's going to cost more for manufacturers, will they even want to do it? But I do think that would be a way of helping with this challenge, because, like you said, it is critical infrastructure. It is life and death. So we need to treat it as such, versus we can just throw whatever we want in a hospital environment and expect it to, be secure, which is kind of what's happening.
Yeah, and I think what you were referring to, and maybe there's other programs, but FedRAMP. You apply your technology provider, you want to sell into the VA or whoever. Well, you got to go through the FedRAMP gauntlet first. They're going to check. They're going to kick the tires, make sure you've done all the right things. But then FedRAMP says you're good to go, and then that's good for all the other federal agencies, right? Approved once, sold anywhere within the government, I'm sure, with some exceptions. Yes, it's expensive, but if you're going to make that commitment as a technology company, as a service provider to the government market, well, then you're going to have to make that investment. If you want to serve the healthcare market, you want to serve the electricity market, you invest up front and the costs go down over time. And maybe you're more competitive within that market than if others who decided not to make that security investment. again, the devil's in the details. How would it actually? It's a big hairy. It's a BHAG, a big hairy audacious goal. A BHAG, we used to call it. So, I'd love to be around for another 20 years to see if that has any legs and any future. But that's a tough one.
Yeah, it's interesting because the FDA already has to clear a medical, what quote falls under the umbrella of a medical device. Yet other pieces of software or technology don't have to be cleared that are added to a hospital environment that can get ransomware. Ransomware, if it delays a patient intake and a patient arrives that's having a heart attack, that patient can die. So it seems like the same lens or regulatory oversight should be applied to anything in a healthcare organization. Now that we're talking about it, it's not like, how is it decided just the medical devices need to be scrutinized when another device can equally, cause harm to a patient?
Right. Yeah. And that would be up to Congress that would say, FDA, you hereby have the authority now to, for any technology systems that a health provider is purchasing for installation in its network, higher levels of priority for those that are touching the patient, lower levels of priority for those that are simply, transporting and storing data. I don't know, but you could give FDA that authority, but then still it would be politically treacherous.
Do you see, I guess, U.S. the Cyber Trust Mark, and in Europe the Cyber Resilience Act as kind of a push in that general direction to try to regulate things like a thermostat going in, which currently don't really have any rules on what you can and can't do with your thermostat, and that can act as the weakest link in the chain in critical infrastructure.
Yeah. Last year, someone in the White House said, yes, you should be using the Cyber Trust Mark for medical devices, to which FDA said, no. No, that's for IoT devices, not medical devices. The FDA has much stricter security standards than the Cyber Trust Mark, but sure, as a matter of hospitals functioning on so much operational technology, HVAC. Refrigeration for pharmaceuticals, elevators, all kinds of physical facility, just badging people in and out. That's a lot of that is IoT technology, the interconnect between software and physical devices. That's an issue as well. But it's often some of those, in some cases, physical technology is still connected to a hospital network. And if a ransomware attack comes in, theoretically, it can shut down not only data and medical devices and IT and communications, it can shut down physical devices as well. So, So, I mean, I think something like the Cyber Trust Mark, it's good in concept, but at some point, we have to have something that's really coherent, rather than just keep layering on different requirements that simply make it more complex and more costly for both the manufacturers and the users, right?
Well, the cost is always transferred to the consumers anyway of all these things, right?
That's true.
So, yeah. Well, it's good to hear that you think, based on that survey you mentioned, that the awareness is increasing. We feel like it's a little bit of a gap in medtech, and I think there's reasons for it because 9 out of 10 medtech startups fail, and some of it has to do with cybersecurity now, but a lot of the time they're not thinking about cybersecurity. They're just trying to get this product to the market and start making revenue and get investors and everything else, just like one more thing on their long list. So, and it's interesting, like I've watched probably 25 pitches from medtech innovators, and they're pitching to investors. They have things on there like we're going to hire attorneys to do intellectual property. I didn't see one single pitch deck with cybersecurity listed. And it is probably a more expensive cost than hiring that IP and patent attorney, but it's not listed.
Well, what's interesting also is sometimes, I was in these conversations when I was in financial services, and often there was a feeling that we don't want to don't talk about cybersecurity. It gets people worried. You don't want to talk about how you're eliminating the negative, how you're eliminating a theoretical negative, which is a cyber attack. And that can worry the customer. What really cybersecurity? But then the other piece of it is, companies who want to be competitive in cybersecurity want to be very careful about saying they are competitive in cybersecurity. Why? Because when you go public with that information, we're 30% more secure than the next leading competition. And the hacker's going, oh, yeah?
Yeah, you're inviting the hackers.
You're inviting them. You're inviting them. So, yeah, so often that's kind of a marketing piece. I remember hearing a pitch, to what you said, Christian, and I kind of asked a question about it to this person. I don't remember who the vendor was. He says, cybersecurity, that's just table stakes. Yeah, of course, we already do that. We're not, that's not something we need to market to you about. To which I probably felt suspicious that they really were doing anything about it. But that can often be the ad. Of course, it's secure because and often the salespeople don't know. And I think that's also an interesting. It's an interesting dynamic within a lot of the big med tech companies. Is we have working with us within the cybersecurity working group. Mostly, it's the chief product security officers, the people within their teams, their chains of command. And first of all, they're very serious about cybersecurity, of course, because they're the chief product security officer. They have a mission. They have an objective. And they believe in it. But within a large, complex global organization, well, there are other equities at stake. There are the engineers who say, you want what? You have the salespeople who say, whoa, wait a minute. That's going to slow us down getting to market against the competition. No. CFO is going, how much is that going to cost us? Marketing people say, no. We don't talk about that. The compliance people are saying, the legal guys are saying, well, there's liability there, isn't there? Make a claim about security, and so, they're pushing, they're Sisyphus, man. They're pushing rocks up the hill. And it's there's just different tension points within a large company like that. And then, they look at the fact that, look, we're doing, how much is enough? We are doing security, and yet we're really not seeing a lot of data that's showing medical devices are the cause of cyber attacks on health systems. Sometimes, they're collateral damage. Of course, they can be collateral damage to a ransomware attack, and sometimes, often it would be with physical proximity. No MFA or whatever. That physical access to a medical device is what gets you network access. But that's not necessarily because security wasn't built in. The hospital was just not doing appropriate security protocols. There's many different ways to look at it. I'm not laying blame on either side.
Well, I think that's a little bit of a naivety. It's like saying there hasn't been too many successful cyber attacks against nuclear plants, so we shouldn't worry about it. You know what I mean? It's still, like you said, critical infrastructure, and we need to assume an attack is going to come. And we already know from the DoD that we have had nation-state actors on classified networks for many, many years, siphoning off data. So what's to say there's not already nation-state actors on our healthcare environments ready to push the button to do something malicious?
And we saw what happened in nuclear with Stuxnet when there was a cybersecurity attack that was very successful. And that was obviously a very, very devastating problem. And so, yeah, we aren't seeing a ton of attacks against medical devices specifically, but that's why we want to harden it. We don't want to see what happens when they are attacking them.
Yeah, and that's exactly right. And that's the uphill battle, is to be able to make that case. The paranoia of a good cybersecurity executive has to be persuasive. That paranoia has to be persuasive to the CEO or the CFO or others who are making those resource decisions, and often risk-based decisions. They're just going to say, okay, but what's the risk of this happening? You can't judge risk by the absence of events in the past necessarily. I'm not a risk expert, but you have to be able to you have to be able to inspire some of that paranoia into the C-suite to support that level of risk reduction. So that's part of what we're trying to accomplish by objective number one. As I read off to you, secure by design and by default. So there's really table stakes,
Exactly. It's not there yet, of course.
It's not there yet. No, it isn't. It is for some. I mean, some of the larger manufacturers are, making the effort. However, we did do a benchmark survey, co-sponsored by us and the Medical Device Innovation Consortium, MDIC, to just sort of survey the med tech community. Essentially, how are you using the JSP? Are you using the JSP? What are the results of that? And it's not, we're not where we need to be.
Well, Trevor's a big fan of the JSP too. We use it with all of our clients. So
great. Well, thank you. That's that's really our objective. All of our, we have, I urge all of your readers to go to healthsectorcouncil.org. And you go to the cyber practices tab. I think today marks the 29th or the 30th publication that we have done. This one is not a best practice, but most of them, like the JSP, like the Managing Legacy Technology Security, like Executive Checklist for Incident Response, or our Supply Chain Cybersecurity Best Practice based on the NIST framework. All of these best practices are free to the stakeholders. They are by the sector, for the sector. We wrote them. Our members, our practitioner members, through a task group structure, wrote these. If everybody, if all med tech companies used JSP, and you guys are serving as ambassadors for the JSP, and other health provider consultancies are serving as ambassadors to the HICCUP, the Health Industry Cybersecurity Practices, HICP, that we put out specifically for hospital systems. Yes, it's called HICCUP. It's that's a joint publication between us and Health and Human Services, and we say to folks like you and other consultancies, take what we've done. It's not copyrighted. It is free. We consider it open source, a public service. And if a consultancy wants to take that best practice and monetize it, sprinkle on your secret sauce as a consultancy, and raise the level of security of your clientele, then that's the force multiplier effect that will permeate across the sector by the year 2029. And so we really take that seriously. All of this is free. We just need people to use it, because if it's shelfware, it's no damn good. And that's what we're getting at, so that we can really protect patient safety at the end of the day.
Awesome. Well, we're coming up on time here. We really appreciate you being a guest, Greg. Thanks for sharing your wisdom. I always ask for parting words of wisdom, kind of last comments. So I'll throw it over to you, Trevor, and then we'll end with Greg.
Yeah, I think this has been a fantastic conversation, and A big thing that really stuck out to me while we were going back and forth about this is the shared responsibility. Cybersecurity can't be pinned on any one individual, and it is ultimately up to the community, the healthcare community, and the cybersecurity community to try to bolster the cybersecurity posture for everyone. Like we keep saying, it really just takes one weak link in the chain to cause a problem. So everyone has to share the effort. Everyone has to share the burden.
Awesome. How about you, Greg? Any last minute words of wisdom?
Yeah, I would say, when you think about the cybersecurity working group, the Health Sector Coordinating Council, we are an advisory council to ourselves and to the government. We have a special relationship with the government. We're not government controlled, government funded. We are independent industry. But what drives all of us is this essential culture of collaboration. We are all in it together. As my friend, the former national cyber director under President Biden, Chris Inglis, formerly of NSA, he put it best. He said, to beat one of us, you have to beat all of us. I mean, he's talking to the adversaries. You could also say all for one and one for all, the Three Musketeers. I say, none of us individually is as smart as all of us collectively. Point being that, as Trevor said, we are all in this together. We cannot be doing it alone. If you, if your viewers want to participate in this process, either as an observer just to learn or as a contributor to help raise the bar, then you should look into participating in the Sector Coordinating Council. It costs nothing. There are no dues. The dues are sweat equity because we are in this together. So I would urge that for all of your viewers, healthsectorcouncil.org. Go to the contact page and let us know you're interested, and we'll get back to you.
Super. Well, thanks again, Greg, for being a guest on the Med Device Cyber Podcast. And thanks everyone for tuning in again, and we hope to see you on the next episode.